The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
This is the reading of the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Once Jesus had finished feeding the 5,000 men, not counting women and children, with 5 loaves and 2 fish. He insisted that his disciples get into their boat and precede him to the other side of the lake. When he had sent them away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray, remaining there alone as evening drew on. And meanwhile, the boat with the disciples, already several hundred yards out from shore, was being tossed about in the waves, raised by strong headwinds. At about 3 a.m, Jesus came walking toward them on the lake. When the disciples saw Jesus walking on water, they were terrified. "It is a ghost," they said, and in their fear they began to cry out. Jesus hastened to reassure them. "Get a hold of yourselves. It is I. Do not be afraid." Peter spoke up. "Lord, if it is really you, tell me to come to you across the water." Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, began to walk on the water, moving towards Jesus. But when he perceived how strong the wind was, becoming frightened, he began to sink and cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus at once stretched out his hand and caught him and exclaimed, "How little faith you have. Why did you falter?" Once they had climbed into the boat, the wind died down. But those who were in the boat showed him reverence, declaring, "Beyond doubt, you are the Son of God." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
About 10 years ago, I was given a task to write a chapter for a book in gerontological pastoral care, and the chapter I was assigned to write had to do with the realities of sin and grace in gerontological pastoral care. And so I had to do some research on sin in a library. I know what you think. So I did, and I did some research both on sin and grace, not only in terms of contemporary writings, but I dug back into the writings of that post-biblical era of the 2nd and 3rd and 4th and 5th centuries. And the writings going back then came mainly out of those early forms of monasticism that were not as organized into great big monasteries, but were more out towards the desert. And there was a real fruitful spiritual reflection upon Jesus and the Gospels and the Christian message and how to live that. And what were the temptations that were stumbling blocks in living that message and living that reality that is Jesus. And so that became the origin of what came to be known and handed down to us in the present day, this capital sins, or the deadly sins, okay? And I found it interesting that if you open up a current catechism of any kind, or a book in a Catholic school, there are 7 capital sins. And we're going to find out what they all are from right here. Okay? And then I'll tell you, originally there were 8, and 1 got dropped. And then we're going to find out what that one is. Okay, this is an interactive sermon here. All right. The 7 capital sins. Sloth. You know what that means? Lazy. Okay. And gluttony. We all know what that means. And lust. Yeah, anybody over the age of. Okay. And then you get into anger. And then envy, and then avarice. You know what avarice is? It means greed. And then finally, the pièce de résistance of deadly sins is pride. Okay. Now, what got left out and dropped over the centuries? Probably pretty quickly, actually. It's right here in the gospel today. Fear. Fear was counted as one of the 8 deadly sins. Now, why would fear be counted as a deadly sin? When I gave this sermon last night, somebody came up to me. It's kind of like coming up to me a few weeks ago saying, "That is the worst sermon you've delivered in 5 years." You know, one of those kind of comments. This one was similar to that. It was saying, "Thank you, Father, for giving me one more sin to be guilty of." Just what I wanted to hear. Thanks a lot. Actually, from the writings, the reason why there was this list of 8 is because it's not like every one of us is prone to all 8. It's just that within that range of 8, we have what is our stumbling block. Okay? We're not all prone to sloth. We're not all prone to gluttony. We're not all prone to lust. We're not all prone to, what was the next one? Anger, envy, avarice, pride, or fear. It's not like those things never happen in our lives or never happen in our conscience or our behavior or attitudes or thoughts. It's just that we're more prone to this rather than that. Okay? And so what the early writings were concerned with is not so much to add to your guilt, by giving you a list of 8 instead of a list of 3. What they were concerned with is your own spiritual discernment. What are my downfalls? What things am I more prone to do? What is my own weakness? Okay? And so basically developing a model of spiritual discernment and spiritual direction in these spiritual communities. Okay? So that was the point. The point was not guilt. The point was really the spiritual discernment. How well do you know yourself? How self-aware are you when it comes to following in the steps of Jesus? And what is your stumbling block in those steps? All right? Now, actually, the reason why fear was part of the list is really because of Jesus. Is because in the Gospels you read over and over and over again, like in today's story, Jesus having to tell his disciples, do not be afraid. Had to keep telling them that over and over and over again. Because why? Because they were, really? Because they thought they had reason to be, really? Okay? But also, what it did, it was eroding their trust in him. eroding their trust in him. They had to trust him for who he was as the Messiah. Jesus' agenda for being the Messiah, his marching orders came from God. His marching orders didn't come from his followers. He was not there for a popularity contest. He was to do the will of the Father. And if the will of the Father is scary to you, which it should be, amen, it is about the redemption of the world. It is about the eradication of sin from the world. That's scary business. And rationally, logically, you're afraid. Even the Blessed Mother had to be told at the Annunciation by the angel Gabriel, Mary, do not be afraid, because she was. Because being visited by an angel is terrifying. Because they are that powerful. They are that, their presence is overwhelming. And so without trust in God, you give way to fear. Now, I reflected on that all week. Reflected on my fears. And of course, the more I did that, the more they popped up. You ever notice that? You ever start paying attention, to your own soul on the inside, and all of a sudden these things just pop up. You go, wait a minute, whoa, where did that come from? Yeah, it's been there all along. Just I wasn't paying attention. Wasn't paying attention. Okay. Now, but I also noticed there were those fears which get in the way. They really do get in the way of my walk with the Lord. And those I need to deal with. Okay. Then there's the other ones. Like as I was passing Worlds of Fun, and I was looking at all these rides, that not for love nor money could you get me on any one of them, because I have acrophobia. Okay? I can live with that. I can live with never setting foot at Worlds of Fun. You may not be able to live with that, but I can. I don't think I need to do anything about that to be a Christian. Do you? Tell me no, because I won't. But there are fears that do stand in the way. Now, I want us to notice, because unless you remember every word of last week's gospel plus every word of this week's gospel, you may have missed it. So that's why I'm going to tell you again. I'm not going to tell you every word, but I'm going to set the context. The context for the feeding 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish was literally the murder of John the Baptist. Jesus got word from Jerusalem up to Galilee that his first cousin and the one who baptized him and the one who was his herald was now murdered by Herod. Okay. And Matthew says when he heard that, he stopped doing what he was doing. He stopped healing, he stopped preaching, he stopped teaching his apostles, his disciples, and he went off by himself. Okay? Now, the problem with Jesus going off by himself is everybody's going to try to track him down and bring him back, which is what happened. And so when Jesus got to the other side, and there was this crowd of 5,000 men, not counting women and children, so he had a crowd of about 20 to 30,000 people. He had pity on them, and he healed them, and he taught them, and he fed them. And once he had done that, then again he dismissed everybody, including his own disciples. Get out of here. Take your boat, go across the lake. I'll catch up with you when I'm good and ready. But he wasn't good and ready right then. So after he got rid of everybody, he went up to the mountain to be alone with God. To be alone with God. And whatever he had to deal with as a human being, like all of us have to deal with as human beings, particularly when you're faced with murder of somebody whom you love. Somebody whom you love was killed. And you have all of this grief and all of this anger, all of this sadness, and maybe fear. Because who was going to be next? Who was going to be next? And so he spent from sundown till 3 in the morning with his father. Once he did that, he was okay. And he went to go after his disciples. Now, those of you who live on a lake know the quickest way to get from one side to the other is how? Go across the water. Okay, usually in a boat of some kind. Well, Jesus didn't need a boat. So he just... But it wasn't so much of what he did. I mean, it was, we all get the visual, of walking on water and then Peter trying to walk on water and failing and all that. But to me, the point of the story taken in the context is that Jesus as a human being, as it says in Hebrews chapter 4, Jesus was tempted in every way that we are, yet never sinned. Okay? How did he do that? Well, when he was tempted and burdened by the awful things of life that came to him, he stopped. He stopped doing what he was doing, and he went alone, and he spent time with God. And he and God worked it out. And then he came back, and then he picked up where he left off. How wise is that?